Welcome, welcome everyone. Um, Today we're here with Brian Lane. Brian Lane is a physics education researcher at the University of Florida. His research interests include computational thinking, communities as of practice, and as we'll soon discuss, game-based learning. He's also a Pathfinder Infinite Master with many top-selling third-party adventures and rule supplements for the Pathfinder tabletop role-playing game. How exciting! Fellow gamer, I love it. With that, Brian, it's all yours.
All right. Thank you, Sherry. Welcome, everybody. Happy Friday. Happy Pi Day. Happy Wheel of Time Premiere Week. Great time to celebrate with y'all. I'm going to go and get my screen share started. I'm just going to share the whole screen just so I don't lose anything. All right. My preview shows my screen sharing, so hopefully everybody can see that. All right. I've also placed my link to these slides in the chat. Let me put that in case folks have joined in the last couple minutes. We will be interacting over the slides, so I'm glad folks have already opened that to encourage you to open that and follow along. So I wanted to talk to you today, as we just mentioned, about supporting physics education with gameplay. I'll tell you a little bit about me. I recognize a lot of the faces in the room, but for the sake of folks I haven't met before and for the sake of the recording, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Then I'll open the floor for discussion about what is your experience with games in education, because I'd love to start with a conversation on how folks have experienced this idea before. I'll go over my background research that I've been doing for this project on games/gamification in education. And I have learned those words are used differently. So we'll talk about what that means. Then I'll get into the specifics of how a tabletop role-playing game works and the TTRPG that I've been working on to try to deliver STEM education in a fun, engaging, collaborative manner. Hi, I'm Brian. I'm at the University of North Florida. I'm an assistant professor of physics and education with 18 years of experience in higher education physics. I'm also the co-director of our Northeast Florida Center for STEM Education. And that means I work in STEM education research, including professional development for teachers, and I also focus on communities of practice. Like was mentioned earlier, I'm a Pathfinder Infinite Master, which is a fun title for a physicist to have. Basically, what that means is I wrote a book of magic tattoos that sold so many copies that Paizo, the primary publisher for Pathfinder, said, "Hey, would you like some of our materials in advance so that you can write more supplements for us?" And so I have a wonderful working relationship with them. I get to I run a game every other week with some PER folks, and that is a fun environment to be in. Another fun fact about me, I have professional clown training. This over here is Rand and Rachel. They are both home with me today. So if that door opens in the background, that's probably them, and I promise I'll be gone for just about 30 seconds. So let's get started with some conversation here. I've got 4 slides here that you can edit. And I invite you to tell me about your experiences with games in education. So in the Zoom chat, there's now a link to this set of slides, these teal slides here. I invite everybody to just grab one of these cards and just tell me something about your experience with games in education. Maybe you have gamified your class. Maybe you bought a physicsy game like Sector Vector, and you've been trying it out. Maybe you've done something like I offered a prize in lab for the lowest standard deviation or something. Maybe you've attended a workshop like this before, or maybe you read an article one time. Maybe you've got no experience, but like many physicists, you've got opinions. Or maybe you want to look ahead at these slides. You're welcome to scroll ahead and linger back behind on whatever slide you want. And maybe there's something coming up that you want to talk about more, or maybe you've just got a question. And so we've got 4 copies of this slide. If I need to add more, I can. I see we got 12 participants. Let me add one more just in case we run out of space there. So we'll take a couple minutes for folks to fill those out, and then we'll pick up with some conversation. Oh, yeah, and thank you, Tony, for reminding me. If you can please leave your name in the card, we'd love to follow up with some questions with you there. Tony giving us some wonderful personal context there. Thank you, Tony. Who's got the dice game on the first slide there? If you could leave your name in there, I'd love to learn more about that.
That's me.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Joe.
I need to sign in so I won't be an anonymous hippo.
Ah, okay. I love the anonymous animals in the Google suite, except it never tells you what your animal is unless you see it on someone else's screen. I wish it would tell you you're the hippo today. Ooh, Chris has an excellent question on the fourth slide there. Looking forward to chatting about that. Oh, and it is now 3:14 on my clock. So happy pie minute. Oops, scrolled too far. Well, I see folks are still typing. We'll give another couple minutes and then we'll kick off our conversation. Probably move this one up here.
And would you be able to put the link to your slides again?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. We have some
Thank
more people join.
I
Yeah.
think so.
Yeah, I love Zoom. It's so accessible, except for the chat. All right. Well, if you're still typing some feedback there, please absolutely continue and wrap up there. But I think we'll start reviewing what some folks have shared. So Joe shared, I had gamified my class by using a dice game as a metaphor for the scientific process. Joe, what is the metaphor there?
So I got this idea from Feynman describing how science is like watching a game of chess and trying to figure out the rules. So it's like trying to reverse engineer the game. And so when I decided to do this, I started thinking, I I'm I know chess barely, but lots of other people know those rules as well. So I wanted a game that no one would know the rules to. So I
Oh.
tried by making up my own, and I,
Mm-hmm.
kind of failed at that because I'm not good at that sort of thing. And then I came across a book, I think by Robert Karplus, and I got a copy of that book attending a workshop at an AAPT meeting. And in that book, there is a dice game called Petals Around a Rose, and I had never heard of it. And that's where I got the dice game. And I sort of the I I sort of modified it by adding some of my own rules toward the end. Like I would make the dice change color, and I would add large dice. I had a like a D100 at one point that I would palm in one hand, and when I would roll the dice, I would throw it at the students like, oh, so I would use this game in class, and the goal was for students to figure out the rules of the game. And we would do I would play the role of nature, and I would go around to each table and I would roll the dice, and I would say, nature says there are 6 petals around the rose. And of course, they thought I had lost my mind. What, this is supposed to be an astronomy class. What's this guy talking about? But it worked. And if anybody wants, I actually did a TPT article on this. I think it was in Astronauts. So you can look that up on the TPT website.
Nice. Go make a note. Look up Joe's Astronauts.
And if anybody just wants to know, I'll explain more in the chat.
That's really cool. This almost sounds like those mystery tubes that I've seen a lot of folks use. For those who don't know, you have 4 ropes coming out of a PVC pipe, and you can see in the back how they are looped together, or there's a ring or something, and the students have to create a model for what's going on inside based on what happens when they pull on the rope. So it's almost like that, except it's in Joe's head. Or a rule book, maybe.
There are some official rules, but I extended them with some of my own.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's really cool. Bogdan, am I saying that right? You also have some experience using dice for a radioactive decay activity. I think I know what that is, but could you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes, it's Bogdan. Yes, we roll the dice and we take out the ones, if I remember correctly, right? And that's the first decay. Then put everything back in, take the ones again, and it's amazing how it works.
It is. Did you try it? Were all the dice the same size, or did you ever try doing
Yes, everything is the same, but I'm aware of variations and all that. And you combine the results for the entire class, so to have better statistics.
Yeah.
It's remarkable how it works.
It really is, because it emphasizes that exponential decay curve is just many, many, many individual events happening. It's so cool.
I always feel that today it will not work, but it does.
Yeah. That's so great. Tony says, I have no experience, but I have thoughts. I guess the closest one for me in gaming is FetSims. Tony, how do you take those from just a simulation to making it like a game or a competition for your students?
Well, I haven't done that in a long time, but when I used to have pet simulations that were game-like, I think it was the electric field hockey game that was the one that was closest, and the students were supposed to actually score, and they were using charges, negatives and positives, and trying to make it. I hope it's still there, but it was a good one for the students. They had to really kind of be creative in how they set up. That's the one I have most experience with.
So there's this whole process in game design called playtesting, where you put the game in front of potential players, you see what they do with it, and you try to see, like, is the experience they're having the experience I want them to have? And that's effectively what FET does when they field test their sims. Like, they just put it in front of a student, they keep track of what the student's doing, and if the student's not interacting with it the way they want, they change the design, or they put an arrow pointing at the thing they need to click on. They basically go through a playtesting process there. So let's see. Dan offered a prize in lab if students could calculate the position a ball would land and hit closest to a bullseye. Yeah, that's I've seen that done a lot. Dan, talk to us about your interest in informal education as well.
So on that slide, I'm interested in the digital games aspect. So when I was in graduate school, we were working on a way to try to build intuition about quantum mechanics. And one of it was like designing a game that would help like people build intuition, and we were getting the framework set up and contacting somebody who would actually program all of this. Um, we kind of fell out of contact with that person. It's a
Yeah.
bit of a long story, but I'm really interested in doing that again.
Yeah.
Digital. I like the handheld, tactile tabletop type games, but I think with digital games you can reach a wider audience. It's easier to
Yes.
push updates
And depending on the informal setting that you're in, like if you're talking about a museum, like ultimately I think you would want like a kiosk that people would just go up to, play a quantum game for 5-10 minutes and come away with a better understanding. Yeah. Also requires a lot of play testing. Let's see. I've gamified my class by using homework at physics classroom. Laura says, I have no experience, but I have thoughts. I have lots of students who are very interested in video games, and we have a very active gaming club on campus, video and board. And I think it would be super cool to use games to teach. I also grew up playing video games and board games. Laura, is there a game that's most popular among your students that that you think has the best connection to physics potentially?
I don't know. I've never gone. Usually
I just lost your audio. I don't know if your mic is disconnected or something.
How about now?
That's better.
Okay. I don't know what happened. The mic's built in, so no, I think most of the students, at least at the club, end up playing kind of games a lot of people can get in on, like Mario Kart on the Nintendo.
Mm-hmm.
The newest iteration of that is. I've had students who in our IT program have like side projects to kind of build games and ask if they can do that and like final projects in my classes. I don't see a lot of students like game design and thinking about games. Classroom, I think.
Very cool. Let's see. We've got somebody interested in slide number 13 because I love RPGs and interested how they would translate to facilitate physics learning. Yeah, slide 13 was the best thing I found for the project I'm going to talk to y'all about in a little bit, but we'll get there. We'll build up the suspense there. Chris had a couple thoughts on this slide. So Chris says, I attended a workshop on education games. It was so general, I didn't know how to use it in my classes. Yeah, I think we've all been in situations like that. How do you make the games cooperative, not just competitive? Chris, what if anything did stand out to you at that workshop you were able to attend though?
I think there was a lot of talk about badging as an incentive and gamifying using badges. And I guess what it just occurred to me right now is that I used to provide like fun stickers if a student got an A on something. And I realized my students use that as a gamification where they're like, did you get a sticker? I got a sticker. How many stickers have you had? So
yeah, my students picked up that motivation when I was doing just-in-time teaching, because part of the goal there is the students are responding to a pre-class reading assignment, and then you're supposed to copy-paste some of their responses into the class discussion. And they would try to see who could get the most comments up on the slides. As I didn't get one this week. I got to write something more interesting next week, which like there's no points. There's not even a sticker associated with it. It's just the pride of, oh, my name ended up on the screen. It's amazing how that motivation works. And yes, Chris, let's talk about cooperative gaming in a few slides, because that is definitely crucial, right? Not just like that's a skill set we want the students to develop. It also kind of shapes the culture of our classroom if it's competitive versus cooperative, definitely. All right, I don't see any additions on these last two. Well, cool. I'm glad folks are thinking about this. I'm glad, you know, this presentation is not coming into a vacuum, that we're all kind of thinking about all this. So I wanted to spend a few slides on some of the background reading I've been doing in preparation for my gamification project. So let's start by talking about the formal education context. I think that's where most of us are kind of thinking about this. Um, so the idea here is that there's kind of two different terms we're going to think about this. There's there's using educational games, and then there's gamification of our class. So let's talk about the difference there. When we talk about gamification, we mean utilizing gaming elements and aesthetics to enhance students' motivation and promote learning. So you're not necessarily like playing a game with the students, you're turning the structure of the course into a gamified environment that has these sort of environments. So things like you might incorporate storytelling, badges, like you just mentioned, points, ladders, avatars, leaderboards designed to motivate students. Actually, I guess I'm done with all of the slide edits there. So let me go to full screen there so that's a little bit more visible. So this is where you're kind of offering those rewards as part of the class. Studies in gamification, however, tend to lack a conceptual framework. They're still kind of working on, like, when we talk about gamifying a classroom, like what are the actual like psychological factors that go on? That's still kind of being explored. And with a lot of the papers I've read, studies in gamification tend to produce mixed results. Like it can work, it's probably going to work, but it might not necessarily engage every single student, which I think, Chris, might get to your point about, cooperative versus competitive. A competitive classroom environment is probably going to marginalize some students more than others. Here I've got a few links for you just to some papers that I find helpful to read. So again, we'll get the link to the slides is in the chat. I'll put it back there in a few minutes when we get closer to the end. But we've got an example of a competitively gamified lab. So this is, I think it was Dan gave the example of trying to get the target with the projectile, right? So something that's not, it doesn't mean the students got it wrong. It doesn't mean that, they're getting less points, but maybe there's a reward for that type of outcome. We have another example of a circuit lab that was gamified with class currency and competition. So there's all these different elements you can layer together. We also have an example of a paper that did gamified online quizzes. So kind of pushing some of that gamification out of the immediate classroom. Now contrast that with educational games. So these are external media that we can introduce into a course to support learning in pursuit of the game's goal. So this isn't necessarily changing the way our course is structured. This is more saying, for today's lab, we're going to play Sector Vector. Or to help you understand superposition, we're going to play a game of Cat in the Box. But we're not necessarily transforming the course around it. We're just making that a class activity. There's a wonderful collection of these on the Science Playground. There's been a few tabletop games released over the years, and even sandboxes. So kind of going back to the idea of gamifying a PhET sim, we can turn those into games, right? We can say, try to solve this problem or try to reach this this general outcome using this simulator. So that might be a good example of a game there. So to kind of summarize that difference, you can think of gamification as changing your class structure, like overall, the stuff that's going on in the course, or you can think of an educational game as being an individual element that maybe you integrate alongside a lab or a homework that looks a little bit more traditional. So those are two different kind of categories to think through as we think about games in formal education. So we also had some interest in informal education. This is something I've been learning about as I've worked through preparing this project. Basically, informal education is anything outside a formal classroom structure. So this could be an after-school club. So if your Society of Physics students gets together and plays a game of Sector Vector, that's now informal education because it's not in a classroom. There's not a professor standing up grading everybody. This could also be a museum. This could be outreach efforts. Like I said, anything outside of kind of the formal classroom structure. There's a lot of thought about how to incorporate digital games into informal education. We were talking earlier about, kiosks at museums, or maybe there's a game where you're trying to wire the power distribution system throughout a city, or maybe you're trying to cool off the planet. And the idea is that people are coming in, they're playing these exploratory games, they're getting something out of it, but there's not there's not a professor standing beside saying, oh, this is an example of this, and let me explain to you how this worked. Like it usually needs to be something that can stand alone. What we found in studies about digital games in informal education is that the novelty of the activity is a pretty strong motivating factor. This notion of I've never learned physics in a video game before, or wow, I've never like been able to manipulate quantities like this. That actually is a powerful motivating factor for a lot of folks. That games can promote fun, playfulness, and engagement. So, you know, I think we would all agree these are important outcomes, even apart from how much did the person learn. These experiences may be subjective and need to be tailored to the audience. So even just thinking about like age range or interests or personal backgrounds, we want to think about how we can appeal to as wide an audience as possible. One thing that's been found is that these digital games might promote interest more than conceptual learning, which I'm personally okay with. Like in my thought process is if somebody comes away from a science experiment or science experience saying, wow, I want to go learn more about that. To me, that's more valuable than saying I can now recite Newton's 3 laws perfectly. We've also got an example in this article of a multiplayer collaborative storytelling. So Chris, to your question, one way to get players kind of on board collaboratively is to orient the game around storytelling, is to get them involved in kind of a common narrative there. That does seem to have positive impacts on conceptual understanding because now you're building that understanding together. There's also a few examples of augmented reality games. So these are things where maybe you're going around the museum with an app and it's showing you like an overlay of information or places you can go to get points. There's also a review article here I'll recommend that outlines a lot of the learning outcomes that can be pursued with games in formal education. So my particular interest in gaming is developing a STEM education tabletop role-playing game. So the way these role-playing games work is that players collaboratively tell a story using dice rolls. If you've seen Stranger Things, you've seen the kids playing what is ostensibly the most popular tabletop role-playing game in the world, Dungeons and Dragons. I do want to give the disclaimer that D&D has been making some not very wholesome choices business-wise lately, so I do just want to name that I'm not here to particularly endorse D&D, just using it as a common reference point. The way these are set up, usually you need one of the players to take on the role of a game master. So this is the person who is setting up the challenges, who is running the monsters, who is saying what's behind each door that the player characters explore. A game master might run a published adventure, meaning they might be looking at a book page by page to say what's in the next room, or they might develop their own story. Maybe they've got a homebrew world they're working for, maybe they're kind of doing it on the fly. Most GMs, myself included, do a combination. So usually what people do is they'll take a published adventure and then they'll add stuff in the margins to say, well, Dan was really interested in this kind of story, so I'm going to add this villain. Laura was really interested in encounters where they're solving puzzles, so I'm going to take out this monster, replace it with a puzzle. Usually that tends to work the best because you're not having to come up with everything wholesale, but you can customize it to your group. The other players each controls one, usually player character. And the idea behind controlling a player character is you get to customize them. So you get to play a wizard who is also good at picking locks and who is very intimidating. Or you can play a fighter who also writes poetry on the side and has a secret deal with a monster out there that gives him a claw on his hand or something like that. And so when we talk about TTRPGs, the stuff that we're looking at is usually player options, like how do I build the character that I want, GM options of how do I run the adventure I want, and setting information about like where does the adventure take place, who lives in this city, what kind of welcome are they going to get here, etc. The reason that's important to me is because a lot of that to me feels like the learning process. Because, you know, when we talk about learning physics, We often do that collaboratively. We often think of that as an exploration of the content that's out there. We often have the physics instructor kind of mediating that experience, and that it feels a lot like the learning process to me. And not just to me, but to the folks at tabletop.edu. These folks have developed this wonderful 6-point framework about how TTRPGs align with learning. So things like academic literacies, when we talk about the story we're creating, the story can reflect that new subject matter that we're trying to learn. Projective identity trajectories, that when I build a player character, I'm not just trying to maximize their attack bonus, I'm also investing myself in them and either expressing myself or exploring some new element of identity that I might be curious about. Because a TTRPG is centered around storytelling, that invokes a lot of 21st century skills like critical thinking. Which path should we take? Where are these clues leading us? Or communication, having to work through and collaborate with your fellow players. TTRPGs can also promote a positive learning mindset. So things like, I can't do this yet, but if I go level up, I'll have the ability to get past this obstacle. I also learned about this thing called attention restoration. I hadn't heard of this before I found Tabletop EDU's framework, but this is the idea that if I'm cooped up in my dorm room studying physics all day, staring at a screen and staring at a textbook, my attention is getting degraded. But if I go out into nature, or if I engage in an imaginary world, my attention starts to rebuild itself. And then, of course, this has a lot of ties to social emotional learning. We are collaborating. We're around the table for a couple hours. We're having to make decisions. We're feeling that tension and then that excitement. Like, that's engaging our emotions in the learning process. So when I wrote the proposal for this game that I'm going to talk about in a minute, we cited this framework heavily. We just made this our framework for our proposal there. So what Brian is doing with this right now, or trying to do, is develop a STEM education tabletop role-playing game called Adventures with Emmy. The premise of this is that Emmy Noether, famous physicist, is the quest giver. She gives a set of missions to the PCs, and each mission accomplishes some learning goal so that we can learn some cool STEM concept in a fun, strategic, collaborative storytelling experience. The way this is mediated, because we're talking about taking that TTRPG structure and kind of layering some STEM learning on top of it, is through something called a resolution rubric. The resolution rubric, I'll show you an example on the next slide, has elements about the claims, evidence, and reasoning that the current encounter is designed to teach. So let's see an example of this. Let's suppose I'm the game master, and my players are facing a water elemental. So this is a creature made of water, it's bubbling, it's frothing. I want my players to tell me that they think they can make the water elemental evaporate, right? Seems kind of simple, but what does it mean for them to actually articulate that? Well, they need to claim that if they push the water elemental closer to a heat source, it will cause it to evaporate, right? That's the claim. But they also need to state some evidence, right? Claims require evidence that the water elemental is made of water. Might seem obvious, but yes, we do want them to state obvious things as evidence. And they also need to state that the heat lamp is hot. Okay, but how does that actually say that it's going to evaporate? Well, then comes the reasoning. Sufficient heat can make water evaporate. The influx of heat is greater at locations closer to the heat lamp. So we've got a claim, we've got some evidence based on what's in the encounter, and we've got some reasoning. If they articulate all three of those, so we're in this encounter, we're trying to get around the water elemental. If the players articulate all three of those points, they've articulated a fully proficient argument. I'm going to ask them to just describe how they get the water elemental close to the heat lamp, and the plan succeeds. We're not going to roll any dice anymore. We're not going to give that kind of threat level. We're just going to say, nope, you figured out the key to resolving this encounter. We're just going to resolve it. And then there will be some plot point here about, like, as it hisses to vapor, eventually cries out the name of the wizard who summoned it, right? Something to provide a hook for the next part of the story. If they articulate only two of those, which usually is they articulate the evidence and the claim and they don't really connect it with the reasoning. Okay, tell me what your plan is. Give me an outline. And then each of them can choose some sort of boon to get. So some sort of bonus to a dice roll they're going to make, or making something easier later on. But they've still got to go through the process of rolling the dice and playing the game there. If they only articulate one of those pieces of the argument, then they're partially proficient. You get a bonus to something you're going to try to do to resolve it, but I want to hear more. The goal is to elicit that full argument, a full set of reasoning from the players. So the way you play this game, we've got the core rules outlined, and we have some player options written. We don't have all the player options written, but we've got enough to play test. Each PC gets to specialize in a field. So maybe you want to play a biologist. Maybe you want to play an electrical engineer. This is kind of taking the place of class in typical TTRPG parlance. So instead of playing a fighter, you're playing a mechanical engineer. Instead of playing a wizard, you're playing a physicist. Each field is going to grant your character special hypothesis actions if you're a scientist, or design actions if you're an engineer. With a hypothesis action, you state an explanation or prediction about what's going on. The GM looks at that resolution rubric, like what we saw in the previous slide, and then evaluates whether the outcome is, but basically whether your hypothesis is accurate or not quite there yet. Same thing with a design action. Instead of describing a prediction, you're describing a thing you're going to build over the next 6 seconds that's going to try to resolve the encounter. Again, the game master can compare that with a resolution rubric and award you an outcome accordingly. The important thing is, if your hypothesis or design is quote unquote wrong, nothing bad happens. You get a different good result. So the objective would be to encourage players to make hypotheses and designs all the time, even if they think they're wrong, because maybe they want the quote-unquote wrong outcome. Let me show you an example. Let's suppose you are a physicist. You might want to use your create model action. So this is going to cost you 1 time step, 1 delta. On your turn, you get 3 deltas. Some things cost 1 delta, some cost 2, some cost you all 3. But you can do 3 separate things. You got 3 separate time steps on your turn. This is where you're going to pick a creature or an object in the encounter, and you're going to start building a model on them. And what that means is at the start of each of your turns, you get to ask the game master a yes or no question about this thing that there is in front of you. And then what you're going to do with another action, you might build a toy model. You might build a little representation of it. You might draw a picture. You might draw a flowchart, something. You get to describe what your player character is doing. If your hypothesis is correct, you get a nice bonus to something you do. If it's partially correct, same outcome, just the bonus is smaller. And if your hypothesis is incorrect, you get a +1 instead of to your check to your defenses against the next time this thing comes to try to attack your character. So maybe you want the defense instead of the bonus to the dice roll, right? Maybe you deliberately make a wrong hypothesis just so you can get that bonus on the incorrect outcome. And maybe you find out your hypothesis was actually correct, and now you got to go change the entire plan in the encounter. Here's another example for mechanical engineer. I see we're at quarter till, so I'll just skip past that part. So let me tell you where we're currently at with this project. In terms of the game development, I have a team of folks committed to writing content for this game. They are TTRPG writers who have STEM backgrounds. We've got a biologist, we've got a chemist, we've got a couple of engineers, we've got a mathematician, we've got me, who all have STEM backgrounds and TTRPG writing credits. It's not exactly a small overlap on that Venn diagram, so not a huge surprise there. But we are also conducting some research on this. So I've got a couple of other PER folks, would love to welcome a couple more as always, that are looking at the 6 dimensions of learning as folks play test the game. So when we run these play test sessions, we collect feedback about the game itself, but we can also investigate how these dimensions of learning are being developed. We submitted a National Science Foundation grant proposal back in early January. I'll be frank, this proposal includes some of the now forbidden words that we're not supposed to use in NSF proposals. So I'm fully expecting it to be purged at some point. If we get a review panel great. I look forward to that feedback, but I would not. I mean, we made Emmy Noether the title character for the sake of diversity, equity, inclusion. You know, then that's not going to change, right? If it's rejected, we're going to do the project anyway. I have some conference travel next week and a couple of projects I'm trying to wrap up over the next few weeks. But basically, end of this spring semester, I'm going to begin looking in earnest for other funding sources. Current thought process, because the NSF proposal is budgeted to support the game development and the research, what I'm thinking we might do is run a Kickstarter for the game development and then look for a smaller foundation grant to fund the research. But everybody on this project is super excited because, like I said, we've got game developers with STEM backgrounds, and we've got physics education researchers with gaming backgrounds. Everybody is super excited and committed to this project. So we're going to make it fly one way or another. So the couple things we need now, certainly would love to hear from other PER folks that might be interested in contributing to the research side. We are also looking for feedback from play testers. So as we get game materials developed, we would love to send you like a sample adventure and maybe a couple of, pre-made characters and see what folks think about running it with some friends. I think that is the last of my slides there. Yes, it is. Thank you all so much for the wonderful conversation already. I don't know what formally is on the schedule, but if there's time for a question and answer, I would love to chat further with folks.
There's absolutely time for questions and comments.
Yay. Oh, and let me get slides back in. There we go. People never know they want your slides till the end of the talk, so.
And this is Chris. Just a
Hi,
logistical
Chris.
question. Can we post a link to your slides on our website?
Absolutely, please do. Let me get you the front slide there. I don't know if y'all know this, but Google Slides, each slide has its own URL.
Very nice.
So when you're in class, if you want to say, add comments to this, you just go to that particular slide, copy paste here, and if you include that slide ID, it goes directly to that one. Free PD information for you.
So I do have a question. In terms of playtesting, I would like to playtest, but nobody that I know plays tabletop games or really video games besides me. And I would also need a GM too for that. So how can we
Have
do
I
that?
got good news for you? So we are in the year 2025, 5 years after all of us had to rush, actually 5 years to the date that all of us had to rush home and teach online. At the same time, all the TTRPG groups across the world had to figure out how to play online. And there are wonderful remote play options for like virtual tabletops. We have included in our budget in this grant proposal a developer for a Foundry VTT implementation. And so we can run playtest sessions with folks who are physically separated. And Dan, I would love to invite you to a session sometime, get you set up there on Foundry, and you run it just like it's at a table. You click buttons to roll the dice. You get to click and drag and move your character around. One of the best parts is, as the game master, I can pause. And so folks are running around, exploring, looking around corners. I can pause and they go, oh no, because they know that means that something's coming around the corner.
Sounds good.
Excellent. Let me go put your name down and I will look you up. I have promised a TV turned on in about 10 minutes, just FYI.
So I love the idea of using the terminology like leveling up. I could imagine connecting that with standards-based grading. Like, hey, you just
Yes.
leveled up.
Yes. Because then, okay, sorry, I've like three things to say in response to this, Chris. That's wonderful. So, when we do TTRPGs, there's kind of two systems for leveling up. One is the traditional, you accumulate so many experience points and then you level up. There's another option called milestone leveling, where you level up when the GM says so. Because the GM knows when you've reached that important milestone in the story that you've both developed your skills enough, it makes sense for you to go on to the next thing. And what a great like metaphor for standards-based grading of you pass the class or you get the standard credit when you've demonstrated it to me, right? So like you could do it both ways, right? You could say when you meet 10 standards, you level up your character in our game this afternoon, or you level up when you've demonstrated this understanding. Another thought process is let's talk about what happens when you level up, specifically in Adventures with Emmy. So there's kind of two things that happens. One is you have these numerical stats, right? I think folks are familiar with strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, etc. We don't call it intelligence in this game. We call it awareness. And we reduce it from 6 attribute modifiers to 4. 6 to 4. There, I can do my fingers. Just so it's a little bit simpler. So you get those to increase so that you're better at doing the stuff, but you also get more actions. So all of these hypothesis actions that I showed you, you get a new one every level so that not only are you getting stronger, you're getting a greater breadth of the type of thing you can do, which is what really drives the story. Like going from a +3 strength to a +4 strength, okay, that's fun. I'm going to succeed 10%, 5% more of the time. But getting to say, oh, and now I do this new thing that I just got is like, that's where the excitement comes from.
Are there other questions or comments for Brian?
If not, can I advertise one other thing?
Go for it.
Okay. I'm also giving a talk next Monday at the APS Global Physics Summit on this focus collection we have on quantum education. I know that's also a hot topic. If anybody is at APS, would love to see you Monday at 1:30 California time. Otherwise, if anybody's interested in quantum education, I have more info in these slides than I could share in that 30 minutes. So feel free to email me. I'd be glad to send you that link as well.
So, Brian, is that for introductory level or is this higher level quantum?
That is for everything. That goes all the way to high school. We've got
Woohoo.
stuff.
All
Woohoo,
right.
indeed. There's a whole paper on reduced Dirac notation for high school that I feel like Joe Hefner in particular might be interested in. But yeah, there's a lot of super cool stuff going on in that collection.
Brian, wasn't that paper you just mentioned, wasn't that on the archive? Is that where I saw that?
Probably. It just came out in PhysRev PER like a month or two ago.
okay.
Yeah. So it's definitely making the rounds.
Pretty sure I've seen it.
Okay, cool. Oh, yes, please. Let's talk quantum sometime. I do. Okay, so in addition to writing the game for Adventures with Emmy, I also have to design the world. And so my thought process is that everything is atop this subterranean world called the quantum caverns, where all the weird quantum fluctuation stuff happens. But it's the caverns because it's fundamental and things get weird when you go lower in scale. I'm hoping it kind of communicates that idea.
Okay, so before we do wrap up, since we're very close to the end, feel free to ask more questions of Brian. But we do need you to please fill out the evaluation for us. And I've got the QR code right there, and I'm going to go ahead and put this tiny URL in the chat as well.
I just did.
Unless Chris has beat me to it. This is very exciting because, yeah, I started role-playing games way back in college.
Nice.
Many all-day D&D sessions, and even now I play online with friends that I've been playing with for about 15 years on like a tabletop simulator and other things. So this is very exciting.